Two identical F-150s, same engine, same driver habits, same routes to work every single day. The only difference between them was the oil in the crankcase. One ran full synthetic the entire time, the other ran high mileage synthetic starting from day one. We tracked both trucks for 100,000 miles, pulled oil samples at every service interval, and sent them to a lab for analysis. What we found wasn't what most people expect, and it's going to change how you think about which oil belongs in your truck. Let's get into it. I run a shop that services a lot of F-150s, and the oil aisle debate comes up constantly. Customers stand there holding two bottles, both saying synthetic on the label, both claiming to protect their engine, and they have no idea which one actually makes sense for their truck. So a few years back, I decided to settle it myself instead of just repeating what the marketing on the bottle says. I bought two 2019 F-150s off the same dealer lot, both with the 5.0-liter Coyote 5.8, both trim level XLT, both with the same rear axle ratio. I handed the keys to two employees who drive roughly the same daily mileage, mostly highway commuting with some stop-and-go city driving mixed in. One truck got a full synthetic 5W20 oil with a standard additive package. The other got a high-mileage synthetic 5W20 formulated with the seal conditioners and extra additives that high-mileage oils are known for. Both trucks got oil changes at the same 7,500-mile interval using the same filter brand. Everything else about ownership stayed as close to identical as I could control it. Before I get into what we found, you need to understand what actually separates these two oils. Because most owners think high-mileage oil is just a marketing gimmick slapped on a bottle to sell more product to people with older cars. That's not entirely true. High-mileage oil is a real, distinct formulation, and understanding what's actually different tells you exactly why our results turned out the way they did. Standard full synthetic oil is engineered around three priorities: thermal stability at high temperatures, resistance to oxidation over the service interval, and consistent viscosity across a wide temperature range. It uses a base oil that resists breaking down under heat, combined with detergents and dispersants that keep contaminants suspended so they get carried to the filter instead of forming sludge. This formulation works incredibly well in an engine with tight tolerances, healthy seals, and internals that haven't experienced significant wear yet. High-mileage oil starts with a similar base, but adds several components specifically targeting older or higher mileage engines. The most important addition is seal conditioners, chemical compounds that cause rubber seals to swell slightly. As an engine accumulates mileage, the rubber in the valve cover gaskets, front and rear main seals, and oil pan gasket shrinks and hardens from years of heat cycling. That shrinkage creates tiny gaps where oil can seep through. Seal conditioners in high-mileage oil counteract that shrinkage by keeping the rubber slightly more pliable, which can reduce or even stop minor seepage that develops with age. High-mileage oil also typically contains a higher concentration of zinc and phosphorus, known in the industry as ZDDP, which provides extra protection against metal-on-metal wear in engines where clearances have opened up slightly from normal wear. On top of that, most high-mileage formulations include additional detergents designed to clean up varnish and light deposits that accumulate over years of operation, along with viscosity modifiers that help the oil maintain proper thickness even as it experiences more blow-by from worn piston rings. None of this is marketing fluff. It's a genuinely different additive package built to address problems that show up specifically in engines that have racked up significant mileage. I had a customer a while back, a guy named Danny, who drove a 2014 F-150 with 165,000 miles on it, who came in complaining about oil spots on his driveway. He'd been running standard full synthetic in that truck his entire ownership because he'd read online that synthetic is always the better choice, regardless of mileage. When I inspected the truck, I found seepage at the front main seal and light weeping around the valve cover gaskets, both classic symptoms of an aging engine with hardened rubber seals. I switched him to a high-mileage synthetic at his next service and told him to come back in 3 months. When he returned, the driveway spots were significantly reduced, and by his following visit, they'd stopped almost entirely. That's not a coincidence. That's the seal conditioner additive doing exactly what it's designed to do. Danny's case is a perfect illustration of why this test mattered to me. I wanted real data, not just anecdotal experience from one customer, to know whether high mileage oil provides real measurable benefit or whether it's something that only helps in certain edge cases. I also want to be upfront about the limitations of a test like this, because I'm not interested in overselling what two trucks can prove. This isn't a laboratory with 100 identical engines and a controlled dyno cycle running around the clock. It's two real trucks driven by real people through real Michigan winters and real summer heat, which actually makes the results more relevant to you, not less, because that's the same environment your own F-150 lives in. I also made sure both drivers avoided towing during the test period, since hauling heavy loads changes oil temperature and shear stress enough that it could have skewed the comparison. Both trucks stuck to daily commuting and the occasional weekend errands, which represents how the majority of F-150 owners actually use their trucks day to day. I wanted this test to reflect a realistic ownership pattern, not an extreme stress test that most owners would never replicate. Back to our two test trucks. At the 25,000 mile mark, we pulled oil samples from both vehicles and sent them to an independent lab for spectroscopic analysis, which measures wear metal content, viscosity, contamination levels, and the remaining life of the additive package. At this early stage, the results were nearly identical between both trucks. Wear metals like iron, copper, and aluminum were within normal range for both. Viscosity held steady in both samples, and neither truck showed any concerning trends. This made sense to me. At low mileage, both trucks had tight tolerances and healthy seals, so the extra seal conditioning and additional ZDDP in the high mileage oil weren't doing much extra work because there wasn't much extra work to do yet. The engines were essentially still in their prime, and standard synthetic handled that environment just as effectively as the high mileage formulation. The 50,000 mile mark is where we started seeing the first meaningful divergence. The truck running standard synthetic showed a slight increase in iron content in the oil analysis, consistent with normal wear at that mileage but trending upward compared to the previous sample. More noticeably, our technician doing the oil change found faint seepage beginning to appear at the valve cover gaskets on the standard synthetic truck. Nothing dramatic, just the earliest visible signs that the rubber was starting to lose some of its original pliability. The high mileage truck showed no visible seepage at this point, and its wear metal numbers were essentially flat compared to the 25,000 mile sample. This lines up exactly with what you'd expect based on the additive chemistry. By 50,000 miles, an engine has gone through enough heat cycles that rubber components begin their gradual hardening process, and that's precisely when seal conditioners start earning their keep. If you're finding this breakdown useful, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because we're about to get into the results at 75,000 and 100,000 miles, and the gap between these two trucks gets a lot more interesting from here. At 75,000 miles, the divergence became impossible to ignore. The standard synthetic truck showed measurable seepage at both the front main seal and the valve cover gaskets, enough that our technician recommended keeping an eye on it, though it wasn't yet severe enough to warrant a seal replacement. Oil consumption between changes had also increased slightly on this truck, going from essentially zero makeup oil needed at 25,000 miles to about half a quart needed between certain service intervals. The high mileage truck told a different story. Seepage was present but noticeably less pronounced, and oil consumption between changes remained close to what it had been at the start of the test. The oil analysis results reinforced what we were seeing visually. The standard synthetic sample showed higher iron and lead content than the high mileage sample, both indicators of increased wear at bearing surfaces and cylinder walls. Neither truck was anywhere near a dangerous wear level. These were still healthy engines by any reasonable standard, but the trend lines were clearly separating, and the high mileage oil was doing a measurably better job of keeping wear metals suppressed as mileage accumulated. We also ran a compression test on both engines at the 75,000 mile mark, just to have another data point beyond the oil analysis alone. Both trucks came back with healthy, tightly grouped compression numbers across all 8 cylinders, and the difference between the two trucks was small enough to fall within normal test variance rather than representing a meaningful gap. This told us something important. At 75,000 miles, we weren't yet seeing a difference in fundamental engine health between the two oils. What we were seeing was a difference in wear rate and seal condition. the kind of gradual, cumulative effect that oil chemistry is specifically designed to slow down but can't completely prevent. This distinction matters because it tells you high-mileage oil isn't magic. It's not repairing damage or reversing wear. It's slowing the rate at which certain age-related issues develop, which over enough miles adds up to a meaningfully different outcome. I had another customer around this same point in the test, a woman named Carla, who owned a 2016 F-150 with about 80,000 miles on it. She'd never once switched oil types since buying the truck new, always running whatever standard synthetic was on sale at the parts store. When she brought it in for an unrelated brake job, I noticed the telltale signs of valve cover seepage and a small amount of staining near the oil pan. I explained what we were seeing in our own test data and recommended she switch to a high-mileage formulation at her next service rather than waiting for the seepage to worsen. She took the advice, and 18 months later at her annual inspection, the seepage had not progressed any further, which is about the best outcome you can hope for once seals have already started aging. Carla's truck is a real-world confirmation of exactly what our lab data was showing with the two test vehicles, just playing out on a customer's actual daily driver instead of a controlled test truck. By the time we hit 100,000 miles, the gap between these two trucks had widened into something you could see without even opening the hood. The standard synthetic truck had developed enough seepage at the rear main seal that it was leaving a small spot on the garage floor overnight, something that hadn't been present at the 75,000-mile check. Valve cover gasket seepage had also progressed to the point where the technician recommended gasket replacement at the next service, purely as a maintenance item rather than an emergency, but still a real cost that Danny's truck experienced years earlier under similar conditions. Oil consumption on the standard synthetic truck had crept up to nearly a full quart needed between some service intervals. The high-mileage truck, by comparison, showed light seepage at the valve cover, similar to what the standard synthetic truck had shown back at 50,000 miles, essentially delayed by roughly 50,000 miles' worth of wear progression. Oil consumption remained modest and consistent, never requiring more than a partial quart of makeup oil between changes. The final oil analysis told the clearest story of the entire test. The standard synthetic sample at 100,000 miles showed iron content noticeably higher than the high-mileage sample, along with elevated lead and copper readings that pointed toward accelerated bearing wear compared to its counterpart. The high-mileage sample showed wear metals that had increased from the 75,000-mile reading, which is completely normal and expected, but at a slower rate than the standard synthetic truck experienced over that same final 25,000-mile stretch. Viscosity breakdown, meaning how much the oil thinned out from shear stress before the next change interval, was also more pronounced in the standard synthetic sample, which lines up with the additional viscosity modifiers built into the high-mileage formulation specifically to combat that exact problem in engines with more blow-by. So here's the clear winner, and it comes with an important caveat that I want every single person watching to understand. Over the full 100,000-mile test, the high-mileage synthetic oil outperformed the standard synthetic oil in every measurable category once the trucks passed the 50,000-mile threshold. Lower wear metal accumulation, reduced seepage at aging seals, more stable viscosity, and lower oil consumption between changes. If you're asking which oil to run in a truck that already has meaningful mileage on it, the data supports high-mileage synthetic without much ambiguity. But here's the caveat. For the first 50,000 miles of this test, there was essentially no measurable difference between the two oils. If you're running a brand new F-150 or one with relatively low mileage, standard full synthetic performs just as well as high-mileage oil because the specific problems high-mileage additives target, hardened seals and worn clearances, simply haven't developed yet in a young engine. Switching to high-mileage oil in a brand new truck isn't harmful, but it's also not providing meaningful extra protection you're not already getting from a quality standard synthetic. What this test really demonstrates is that high-mileage oil isn't a scam, and it isn't a universal upgrade either. It's a targeted formulation that solves specific problems that develop as an engine ages, and its benefits only become apparent once those problems actually exist. My general recommendation based on both this test and years of working on these trucks in my shop is to run standard full synthetic until your F-150 crosses somewhere around the 60,000 to 75,000 mile mark, then transition to a high mileage formulation from that point forward. If your truck is already showing early signs of seepage, oil consumption between changes, or you're simply past the 75,000 mile mark regardless of visible symptoms, switching now rather than waiting will give the seal conditioners more time to do their job before hardening progresses further. And if you've got an older truck that's already leaking more significantly at the rear main or front seal, understand that high mileage oil can reduce minor seepage, but it is not a substitute for an actual gasket or seal replacement once leakage becomes severe. No additive package can fully compensate for a seal that's physically failed. If you're already seeing a puddle forming under your truck overnight rather than a faint spot, that's beyond what any oil formulation can address, and you need an actual technician to inspect which seal or gasket has failed and replace it properly. It's also worth addressing a question I get constantly in the shop, which is whether high mileage oil is somehow worse for a newer engine, as if it's going to overcondition seals that don't need it yet. Our data doesn't support that concern. The truck running high mileage oil from day one showed no negative effects whatsoever in the early portion of the test. Wear metals stayed just as low as the standard synthetic truck, viscosity held steady, and there was no evidence of seals swelling excessively or any other downside. The seal conditioners simply weren't doing much extra work yet because the rubber components hadn't started shrinking, but they also weren't causing any measurable harm by being present. So if you'd rather run high mileage oil from the day you drive your truck off the lot, just for peace of mind, this test suggests you're not creating a problem for yourself, you're just paying for protection you don't fully need until later in ownership. The real inefficiency isn't running high mileage oil too early, it's running standard oil too long after your seals have already started their natural aging process. One more thing worth mentioning from this test, neither truck experienced any drivability issues, warning lights, or performance differences at any point during the 100,000 miles. Both trucks ran the same, felt the same behind the wheel, and would have seemed completely identical to an average driver who wasn't pulling oil samples and doing compression tests along the way. This matters because it shows you why so many owners never realize which oil is actually protecting their engine better. The differences we found live inside the metal, in wear rates and seal condition, not in how the truck drives day to day. You won't feel this difference on your commute. You'll feel it or avoid feeling it 10 years and 120,000 miles down the road when one engine needs a rear main seal replacement and the other one doesn't. If you've got a high mileage F-150 sitting in your driveway right now, take this as your sign to check what's actually going in during your next oil change. Pop the hood after your truck has been sitting overnight and look underneath for any spotting. Check your dipstick level a few weeks after your last change to see if you're losing oil between services, and have an honest conversation with whoever does your oil changes about switching formulations based on your actual mileage rather than just grabbing whatever's on sale. Small decisions like this one don't feel important in the moment, but they're exactly the kind of thing that separates a truck that's still running strong at 200,000 miles from one that needed expensive seal work at 130,000. If this breakdown helped you understand what's actually happening under your hood, do me a favor and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what mileage your F-150 is currently sitting at, and share this with anyone you know who's still debating which oil bottle to grab off the shelf. Next week, we're pulling apart a customer's transmission that failed at 90,000 miles to show you exactly what happens when fluid gets neglected for too long, and it's not a pretty sight. I'll see you in the next one.